Your sister just bought a beautiful house, my mother announced to 14 relatives at Christmas dinner, her voice ringing like she was introducing a Nobel Prize winner. Then she turned to me and smiled, the kind of smile that looks warm until you realize it's aimed downward. So June, when are you going to settle down? My sister Vanessa leaned back in her chair, new earrings catching the candlelight, and smirked. I put down my fork. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I already did, I said. I paid cash. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. 14 forks stopped moving. My mother's mouth opened, but nothing came out. And that was only the first 5 seconds of the longest Christmas dinner the Bellamy family has ever had. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. My name is June. I'm 27. And this is the story of how I stopped being my family's invisible bank account. Now, let me take you back to October, 2 months before that dinner. The night a single bank transfer changed everything. It was a Thursday night in October, and I was cross-legged on my couch in a one-bedroom apartment just outside Millbrook, finishing a prototype for a client dashboard. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The radiator was clicking that familiar metal song it sang every autumn. My phone buzzed on the side table. Mom glowed on the screen. I picked up. No hello. No, how are you? Just the sound of her exhale, long, practiced, and then her voice. The roof's been leaking again, June, the east side. The contractor said $4,200 to patch it before winter. I can't cover that on my pension. I stared at the ceiling of my own apartment, where a brown water stain had been spreading for 6 weeks because I hadn't gotten around to calling my own landlord. $4,200. That was more than my rent for 2 months. I'll transfer it tomorrow, I said. You're a good girl, June? Click. 4 words. That was the most warmth I'd gotten from her since March, and even that call in March had ended with her asking me to cover Vanessa's car insurance payment. I set the phone down and opened my personal spreadsheet, the one I kept tucked in a folder labeled Family on my desktop. I'd started it 3 years ago, the first time my mother called about an emergency that needed my money. Back then I thought it would be a short list. It wasn't. 3 years, 17 transfers, $31,400, roof repairs, plumbing emergencies, car insurance premiums for my sister, a new water heater, security deposit help. Every single time the call came the same way. That long exhale, then the number, then the click. Not once, not one single time, had anyone said more than 4 words of thanks. I closed the spreadsheet, transferred the $4,200 to my mother's account, and went to bed, telling myself what I always told myself. This is the last time. 2 weeks later, I was eating leftover soup at my kitchen counter when I made the mistake of opening social media. Vanessa's face filled my screen. She was standing in front of a house I'd never seen. Sage green door, white trim, a woven welcome mat that probably cost more than my dinner. Her smile was the kind you hold for 8 seconds so the camera catches the good angle. The caption read, "New beginnings. Thanks to the best mom ever." Followed by a yellow heart emoji. 47 likes. Lorraine Bellamy had commented a row of red hearts. Uncle Don left a clapping emoji. Aunt Patty wrote, "So happy for you, sweetie." I scrolled through every comment. My name wasn't in any of them. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't even in the background of the photo. Thanks to the best mom ever. I read it 3 times. Something nagged at me. Quiet, like a splinter under skin you can't quite see. But I pushed it down. Vanessa had always been better at saving, I told myself. She and Derek must have planned this for a while. Good for her. That same evening, my mother forwarded the photo to the family group chat. "So proud of my girl." Uncle Don sent a thumbs up. 2 cousins hearted the message. Then Aunt Margot, my father's sister, the one who ran the little flower shop 2 towns over, typed a single line. "Lovely. How's June doing?" I watched the chat. 1 minute, 2 minutes. 5. Nobody answered her. The chat moved on to Thanksgiving planning. Margot's question sat there like a stone dropped into a well, falling, falling, never hitting bottom. I locked my phone and finished my soup. But that splinter, that quiet nagging, didn't go away. It would take me another month to understand why. Thanksgiving at my mother's house smelled the way it always did. Roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, and something faintly burnt that nobody would acknowledge. I'd driven 40 minutes with a homemade apple pie on the passenger seat and a bottle of wine tucked behind the brake pedal. When I walked through the door, I saw the dining table first. 12 chairs, all occupied. Uncle Don, Aunt Patty, 2 cousins, Vanessa, Derek, and a handful of others whose names blurred together. At the far end, a young man I didn't recognize sat in what used to be my seat. "Oh," my mother said, wiping her hands on her apron as she came around the corner. "That's Kevin, Lily's new boyfriend. I figured you wouldn't mind sitting at the side table. You're easy like that." The side table was a metal folding table wedged into the kitchen, between the counter and the recycling bin. No tablecloth, no candle, just a paper plate and a fork still in its plastic wrapper. I sat down. Through the open doorway, I could hear my mother stand and raise her glass. To Vanessa and Derek, and their beautiful new home. Glasses clinked. Laughter swelled. Someone said, "Cheers," and someone else said, "So proud of you two." Nobody looked toward the kitchen. I ate in silence, listening to my family celebrate a life I'd helped fund without anyone knowing. When the dishes started piling up, I washed them, mine and theirs. My pie sat on the counter, untouched. My mother had ordered one from a bakery in town. It had a little gold sticker on the box. Driving home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 full minutes before turning the key. I wasn't crying. I was just very, very tired. That night, I opened my laptop. Not for work. I opened my bank statement. And for the first time, I started comparing dates. I need to go back further to explain what I found. Back to when I was 14. My father died on a Tuesday in April. Heart attack. He was 44. One moment he was pouring orange juice in the kitchen, the next he was on the floor, and the glass was still rolling toward the table leg when I ran in. The ambulance came in 9 minutes. It wasn't fast enough. After the funeral, my mother stopped functioning, not in a dramatic, made-for-TV way. She just went quiet. The mail piled up inside the door. The electricity bill turned pink, then red. Dinner became whatever was already in the freezer, and then nothing at all. Vanessa was 17. She grieved the way teenagers grieve, locked in her room with the music loud enough to feel through the walls. She missed 2 weeks of school, and nobody questioned it because she was the sensitive one. I was 14, and I was the one who called the insurance company. I sat at the kitchen table with a cordless phone and a stack of envelopes I didn't understand, learning words like past due and beneficiary and grace period. I cooked mac and cheese from a box every night for 3 months. I wrote checks I'd watched my father write, copying his handwriting because I didn't have my own signature yet. My mother recovered, slowly, but my role never reset. The emergency became the routine. I was the one who handled things. Vanessa was the one who was handled. My father used to say something to me, usually while we were sitting on the porch after dinner. "You're like me, June. You'll figure it out." I used to think that was a compliment. Now I understand what it really was. An apology, in advance, for everything that was coming. When Vanessa got engaged to Derek 3 years ago, my mother called me before she called anyone else, not to share the joy, to discuss the budget. "Your sister deserves a beautiful day, June. I can cover about 8,000, but the rest? I need you to help with the difference." The wedding would cost 12,000. A small ceremony at the chapel on Birch Lane, a garden reception behind the VFW hall, 80 guests. It was modest by most standards, but $4,000 was not modest for me. It was the exact amount I'd saved for an advanced UX certification course that would have pushed my salary into a new bracket. I transferred the money on a Friday. By Saturday, I'd talked myself into believing it was the right thing to do. The bridesmaid list came 2 weeks later. 4 names. All friends of Vanessa's from high school and her gym. I wasn't on it. Wants her friends beside her, June. You wants her friends beside her, June. You understand. You're not really the dress-up type anyway. So on Vanessa's wedding day, I stood in the 3rd row wearing a dress I bought on clearance. The official photographer ran out of time before reaching my side of the aisle, so I ended up behind a borrowed camera, taking candids for the reception slideshow. I photographed my sister's happiest day through a 2-inch viewfinder. Vanessa's thank you post went up that Sunday night. She tagged her mother. She tagged all 4 bridesmaids. She tagged Derek. She tagged the florist. She didn't tag me. $4,000. A certification I never took. And a photo reel full of someone else's perfect day. I didn't say anything. That was always my mistake. I didn't say anything. I could walk you through every single transfer, but the pattern is simpler than you think. It always started with the exhale. My mother's long, slow sigh on the phone, the one she'd perfected into a weapon. And it always ended with a number. The water heater in 2023, $1,800. My mother told her neighbor Ruth that God had blessed her with a discount from the plumber. God had nothing to do with it. My checking account did. Vanessa's car insurance after she rear-ended someone in a parking lot in early 2024, $2,400 a year. My mother called and said, "She's your sister, June. She has a family to think about." Vanessa texted me afterward. 1 line. The ex-sis. Followed by a thumbs-up emoji. 1 emoji for $2,400 a year. I kept my spreadsheet current the way some people keep a journal. Every transfer, every date, every excuse my mother gave. And beside each entry, I left a second column. What they did for me. That column was blank. Every row, every year. 3 years of giving, and the return column looked like fresh snow. Here's the part that gets me. It wasn't just that my mother took the money. It was that she erased me from the story entirely. At family gatherings, she'd tell Uncle Don and Aunt Patty, "I manage on my own. It's tight, but I'm proud." She'd say it with her chin lifted, like a woman in a wartime photograph. And everyone would nod, impressed. Meanwhile, my bank account bled in silence. $31,400. 3 years. 1 emoji. Every time I told myself the same thing. This is the last time. But the last time never came. Not until October, when I started comparing dates on a bank statement and the math stopped adding up. In September, a month before the roof money, I stopped by my mother's house to return a set of spare keys from the last plumber visit. The front door was open a crack, the way it always is when she's airing out the kitchen after cooking. I stepped inside and heard her voice drifting from the back of the house. That slightly louder, slightly sweeter register she uses when she's on FaceTime. I should have announced myself. Instead, I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob, because I heard my name. Honestly, I don't know what June's doing with her life. She sits on that computer all day. At least you have a real home, a real husband. Sometimes I worry she'll end up alone and I'll have to take care of her. Vanessa's laugh came through the phone speaker. Light. Easy. The kind of laugh that isn't cruel on purpose. It's cruel because it doesn't even notice. "Mom, she's fine. She's just... June. She's just June." I stood there for, I don't know how long. 10 seconds? Maybe 30? Long enough to memorize the pattern on my mother's hallway wallpaper. Faded yellow roses, the edges peeling near the baseboard. Long enough to feel something inside me go very still. I set the keys on the console table by the door. I didn't slam them. I placed them down the way you place a glass on the edge of a counter. Carefully, because you know if you're not careful, something will shatter. Then I walked out. Closed the door. Got in my car. I drove 25 minutes home without turning on the radio. No music. No podcast. Just the sound of the road and my own breathing. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Not because I was sad, though I was. because for the first time in 13 years, a question surfaced that I'd never allowed myself to ask. Was the roof actually leaking? Driving home that night, I kept replaying that sentence. She's just June. 2 words that reduced everything I'd ever done, every bill I'd covered, every emergency I'd solved, every dollar I'd sent, into a shrug. Like I was a lamp in the corner of a room that nobody turns on but nobody throws away either. Have you ever been summed up in a way that erased everything you've done? If so, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Because that night, something inside me shifted. And I think you'll understand what I did next. The night after Thanksgiving, I sat on my couch with cold coffee and a laptop open to my bank's transaction history. The $4,200 I'd transferred to my mother on October 3rd stared back at me in clean digital type. October 3rd. I sent the money. I opened a new tab and typed Vanessa's address into Zillow. She'd posted it publicly, pinned it to her profile like a trophy. The listing loaded. Sale date, October 28th. But the listing history told a different story. Under contract, October 5th. 2 days. My mother received $4,200 on a Thursday, and by Saturday my sister's name was on a purchase agreement. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of it with a spoon. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the contractor. The same one my mother had mentioned back in the spring when the porch railing needed fixing. I'd saved his number because I was the one who'd coordinated the repair. I always was. The phone rang 3 times. Hi, this is June Bellamy, Lorraine's daughter. I wanted to check on the roof work you did at her house in October. A pause, then. Ma'am, I haven't been out to that address since April. Your mom called me about the east side, but she canceled the appointment. Said she'd handle it another way. Another way. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat very still on my couch and let the math finish itself. The roof wasn't leaking. It probably hadn't leaked since spring, if it ever did at all. My $4,200 didn't go to shingles and flashing. It went to a down payment on a house with a sage green door and a welcome mat I'd never been invited to step on. And my sister knew. She knew, because you don't accidentally receive $4,200. You just choose not to ask where it came from. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the spreadsheet open and a glass of water I never drank, and I looked at 3 years of my life reduced to rows and columns. 17 transfers. $31,400. Beside each entry, the second column. What they did for me glowed white and empty, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for something that would never come. I tried to remember the last time my mother called just to ask how I was. Not, how are you? And also, but just, how are you? Full stop. I couldn't find one. Not this year, not last year. I tried to remember my last 3 birthdays. 26. No one called. I ate pad thai alone and watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures. 25. My mother texted HBD at 11 p.m. 11 p.m., like she'd suddenly remembered at the last second. 24. Vanessa asked me to drive her to her prenatal checkup that morning because Derek was working a double. She never mentioned it was my birthday. I didn't remind her. I closed the spreadsheet. Not in anger. In clarity. It was the strange, cold kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop arguing with evidence. I opened a new tab. Zillow. Millbrook area. Homes under $180,000. Here's the math no one in my family knew. I earned $95,000 a year. I lived in a $600 apartment. I drove a 2016 sedan with 140,000 miles on it. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy new clothes unless something wore through. For 5 years, I'd saved like someone preparing for a disaster. Except the disaster turned out to be my own family. $142,000. Cash. In a savings account no one knew existed. If I stopped pouring money into a hole that never filled, I could buy a house in 3 months. My own house. No mortgage, no permission, no mother's name on the deed. I closed the laptop at 4 a.m. For the first time in years, "This is the last time," wasn't a lie. Aunt Margot's flower shop sat on a quiet street in Drayton, 2 towns east of Millbrook. It was a small place, hand-painted sign, bell on the door, coolers full of arrangements she built by hand every morning before sunrise. She'd run it alone for 20 years, ever since Uncle Gene passed. I hadn't planned to tell her anything. I just wanted to sit somewhere that didn't feel like my apartment or my mother's kitchen. But Margot had a way of making silence feel like an invitation. She poured tea into a chipped blue mug, set it in front of me, and sat down across the work table scattered with rose stems and ribbon. She studied my face the way she always did, like she was reading a page she'd seen before. "You look like your father," she said, "the week before he told me he was going to marry your mother. That same quiet look. The one that means you've already decided something." I told her everything. The 4,200. The contractor who hadn't been to the house since April. The Zillow timeline. The spreadsheet. The $31,400 that had left my account over 3 years and vanished into a family that pretended it managed on its own. Margot listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her teacup down on its saucer, a small, precise sound in the quiet shop, and folded her hands. "Honey, I've watched this for 13 years. Your mother loves Vanessa the way she loved looking in a mirror. And you remind her of your father. She never forgave him for dying." The sentence hit me somewhere behind my ribs. "What are you going to do about it?" Margot asked. "I'm going to stop paying for a family that doesn't see me," I said. "And I'm going to buy my own house." Margot looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once. "Good. And if you need a witness at closing, you call me." The first week of December, I ran into Ruth Kendrick at the grocery store. Ruth was my mother's neighbor, 3 houses down on Maple, the kind of woman who brought banana bread to every new family on the block and knew everyone's business not out of malice, but because she simply couldn't help collecting information the way some people collect stamps. She'd been a loan officer at Millbrook Community Bank for as long as I could remember. She notarized documents for half the town and still called everyone honey, regardless of age. She spotted me in the cereal aisle, cart half full, and lit up like I'd made her day. "Oh, June, I haven't seen you since summer. Your mother talks about Vanessa's house nonstop. So proud. You know I helped her with the paperwork at the bank, right?" I nodded, smiled the small, automatic smile I'd perfected for conversations about my sister's achievements. Ruth leaned in slightly, the way she did when she was about to share something she considered helpful rather than private. "Between you and me," she said, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a whisper, "I hope they get back on track soon. The first few months of a mortgage are always the trickiest, especially when there's other debt involved. But your sister's a smart girl. She'll figure it out." Other debt. I kept my expression steady. "I'm sure she will." Ruth patted my arm, wished me a Merry Christmas, and wheeled her cart toward the dairy section humming Jingle Bells. I stood in the cereal aisle for another 30 seconds, holding a box of oatmeal I didn't need, turning 2 phrases over in my mind like coins. Get back on track. Other debt. The picture I'd been assembling since Thanksgiving night was now complete. Vanessa hadn't bought a beautiful house. Vanessa was drowning in one. And my mother had used my money to push her off the dock. The call came on a Wednesday evening, the second week of December. I was making dinner. Just pasta, nothing special. And my mother's name appeared on the screen with the reliability of a monthly invoice. I picked up. The exhale arrived right on schedule. "June, the heating bill came in, $480. It's going to be a cold winter." I turned the burner down, leaned against the counter, took a breath. "Mom, I can't cover it this month. You should call the energy company. They have a payment assistance program for seniors. I can text you the number." Silence. 4 seconds of it. Which, if you've ever said no to someone who's never heard it from you, feels like 40. "Excuse me?" Her voice didn't rise. It dropped. Lorraine Bellamy didn't yell. She chilled. "I can't cover it," I repeated. My voice was steady, but my free hand was gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles ached. I raised you alone, June. After your father died, I held this family together. I didn't ask for much. I just asked you to care. Click. She hung up. No goodbye, just the dead air of a disconnected line and the sound of pasta water boiling over onto the stove. 20 minutes later, the family group chat lit up. My mother. Pray for me. It's going to be a cold Christmas, Uncle Don. Hang in there, Lorraine. Aunt Patty. You're the strongest woman I know. Vanessa. Mom. We'll figure it out. I stared at Vanessa's reply. We'll figure it out. Beautiful words. $0 attached. She didn't offer to pay the heating bill. She didn't call our mother and say, I've got it. She just posted a heart emoji and let the implication hang in the air. The implication that someone else would handle it. Someone always had. But not this time. I found the house on a Saturday afternoon in mid-December, scrolling through listings while snow piled up on my windowsill. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. A small fenced yard with a crabapple tree that the listing said bloomed pink in spring. The siding was gray, the porch needed a new railing, and the kitchen still had laminate counters from the 90s, but the foundation was solid. The inspection came back clean. And the roof, the actual, real roof, had been replaced 2 years ago. $159,000. I could pay it outright. I called Margot that evening. I found it. When do we sign? The closing was on December 18th, 1 week before Christmas. I sat at a long table in a title company office with fluorescent lights and a plastic plant in the corner. Margot sat beside me, handbag in her lap, reading glasses perched on her nose like she was there to audit the whole operation. The notary pushed a stack of documents across the table. Buyer present? Present, I said. Under the table, Margot reached over and squeezed my hand. Once, firm, then let go. I signed everywhere they told me to sign. 32 pages. My hand cramped by page 20. When it was done, the notary smiled and said, Congratulations, it's yours. Margot took off her glasses and looked at me. Your father would have cried right now. The good kind. I drove to the house alone afterward, parked on the street, walked up the porch steps, put the key in the lock and turned it. The door opened into an empty living room, bare wood floors, white walls, the smell of fresh paint and cold air. No furniture, no curtains. No group chat pinging in my pocket. Just silence. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, the silence didn't mean I'd been forgotten. It meant the space was mine. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone except Margot. Christmas was 1 week away, and I had something I'd never had before at a family dinner. A truth I didn't need to hide. My mother's Christmas invitation arrived in the group chat on a Monday, 6 days before the dinner. Christmas Eve dinner at my house. 6 p.m. Bring a dish. Vanessa responded within minutes. Derek and I will bring the glazed ham. Followed by 3 more emojis, because Vanessa never met a sentiment she couldn't decorate. Uncle Don confirmed. Aunt Patty confirmed. 2 cousins confirmed. Ruth Kendrick, who my mother always invited because she lived alone and brought good wine, confirmed. I stared at the message for a long time. If I didn't go, my mother would have the narrative she wanted. June couldn't even show up for Christmas, after everything I've done. She'd say it with that practiced sadness, and everyone would shake their heads, and I'd become the cautionary tale of the ungrateful daughter. If I did go, I'd sit at the folding table in the kitchen again. I'd wash dishes while Vanessa received toasts. I'd drive home full of turkey and empty of everything else, unless this time was different. I called Margot. She sent the invite. I'm going. And this time, I'm not sitting in the kitchen. A pause. Then Margot's voice, steady as a fence post. Good. Neither am I. I typed 2 words into the group chat. I'll be there. No emoji, no exclamation point. Just a confirmation, plain as a signature on a closing document. I wasn't planning a speech. I wasn't rehearsing devastating one-liners in the mirror. I simply decided one thing. If they asked me a question, I would answer it honestly. If they didn't ask, I'd eat my dinner, say Merry Christmas, and leave. But I would not lie, and I would not apologize for the truth. That was the entire plan. Honesty. After 27 years of silence, it felt radical enough. 3 days before Christmas, my mother called again. This time, there was no exhale. She got straight to the point, which meant she was nervous. Lorraine Bellamy only skipped her own rituals when something felt out of her control. I need you to come early, 5 o'clock. Help me set up the table, arrange the chairs, get the dishes out. Vanessa's handling the ham and the centerpiece, so you can take care of the rest. The rest. The invisible labor. The behind-the-scenes work that made the evening look effortless, while Vanessa walked in with a glazed ham and a perfect smile and collected all the credit. "I'll come at 6, I said, same as everyone. The temperature on the other end of the line dropped 10 degrees. "June, don't be difficult, it's Christmas." "I'm not being difficult, Mom. I'm being a guest, same as Vanessa." Another silence. I could hear her recalculating, the way a chess player pauses when a pawn moves somewhere unexpected. Then she reached for the big gun, the one she always kept loaded. "Sometimes I think you forget everything I've done for you." Her voice softened into that particular register of manufactured grief. "Your father wouldn't have wanted this." My stomach tightened. It always did when she said that. For 13 years, she'd weaponized a dead man's memory every time she needed compliance, and for 13 years, it had worked. But this time, Margot's words rose up to meet it. She never forgave him for dying. My father wasn't a card to play. He was a man who poured orange juice and said, "You'll figure it out," and died too young. And he would not have wanted his name used as a leash. "I'll see you at 6, Mom." I hung up first. My hands trembled against the phone. But I didn't call back. Christmas was 3 days away. And for the first time, I was walking into my mother's house with my spine straight and my wallet closed. December 24th, 5:55 p.m. I parked on the street in front of my mother's house and killed the engine. The neighborhood was quiet. That particular small-town hush that falls on Christmas Eve, when the whole world seems to hold its breath between afternoon and midnight. My mother's house glowed. String lights lined the porch railing. A wreath hung on the front door. Through the living room window, I could see people moving. Silhouettes with wine glasses, the flicker of candles on the dining table. Cars lined the curb. Uncle Don's sedan, Aunt Patty's minivan, Ruth Kendrick's blue hatchback, Derek's work truck. And at the end of the row, Margot's old pickup with the magnetic flower shop sign on the door. I sat in my car for 2 minutes, opened the glove compartment and took out the one thing I always carried, a photo of my father and me at the ice cream shop on Route 9, taken when I was 12. Both of us squinting into the sun, both of us laughing. I looked at it, took a breath, put it back, stepped out into the cold. The front door was unlocked. I walked in, and the warmth hit me first, followed by the smell of ham and cinnamon and something faintly burnt that nobody would acknowledge. On the hallway wall, 8 framed family photos hung in a neat row. I counted the way I always counted. 5 with Vanessa in the center, 2 group shots, one of my father alone, young, in a suit I'd never seen in person. None of just me. My mother appeared from the kitchen in her holiday apron, red, with embroidered holly. She looked at me the way you look at a delivery that arrived later than expected. "Oh, you came. Good. The table still needs napkins. They're in the hall closet." Not, "Merry Christmas, June." Not, "I'm glad you're here." A task. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I said. I walked past the closet, past the kitchen, into the living room, where Margot sat in the corner armchair with a glass of eggnog, watching me over the rim. She gave me one small nod. I sat down. The evening had begun. Dinner was served at 6:30. 14 people arranged themselves around the extended dining table like actors finding their marks. Vanessa took the seat beside our mother, directly across from Derek. I ended up at the far end, between my 19-year-old cousin Lily and an empty chair that nobody bothered to remove. At least I was at the main table this time. Progress. The glazed ham sat in the center, glistening under the chandelier my father had installed the year I was born. Vanessa had tied a sprig of rosemary to the serving fork, a detail so perfect it looked staged. It probably was. My mother stood. She lifted her wine glass the way a mayor lifts a ceremonial key. Slow, deliberate, meant to command the room. Before we eat, I just want to say how proud I am. She looked at Vanessa with an expression I can only describe as ownership. Vanessa and Derek bought their first home this year, a real home, a 3-bedroom, with a yard. That's what family is about, building something. She paused, letting the word building settle over the table like a blessing meant for one person only. Vanessa pressed her hand to her chest. "Ah, Mom." The humble, grateful face. She'd perfected it the way a concert pianist perfects a scale, through relentless repetition. Then she turned to the rest of the table. "Honestly, it's been a dream. 3 bedrooms, a yard for someday when we have kids. We're just so blessed." Uncle Don raised his glass. "That's wonderful. You're building something real, Vanessa." Aunt Patty beamed. The cousins murmured approval. Across the table, I saw Ruth Kendrick smile and nod. But her eyes dropped for just a second, the way they do when someone knows something they're trying not to say. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody turned my direction. I cut my turkey and chewed in silence. And from the far end of the table, Margot watched the room the way a woman watches a pot she knows is about to boil. It happened between the main course and dessert, during that lull when plates are half empty and the conversation softens into something loose and unguarded. My mother leaned forward in her chair, tilted her head toward me, that practiced angle of maternal concern that always preceded something sharp, and said, loud enough for the entire table, "So, June, your sister has a house, a husband, a plan." She gestured at Vanessa the way a game show host gestures at a prize car. "When are you going to settle down? You can't just sit behind a laptop forever." Vanessa didn't miss her cue. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and smiled at me the way you smile at a younger cousin who just said something naive at Thanksgiving. "Seriously, June, you're 27. What are you even saving for?" A few people laughed, the polite, uncomfortable kind. Uncle Don chuckled into his wine. Lily stared at her plate. Derek looked down at his fork and said nothing, his jaw tight. Only Margot was still. Her eggnog sat untouched. Her eyes were on me. I looked at my mother, then at Vanessa. Then at the table full of people who had watched me get smaller every year without ever saying a word. I set my fork down. Slowly. Metal touched porcelain. A small, clean sound that cut through the room like a pin dropping in a cathedral. "Actually, Vanessa," I said, my voice level, almost conversational, "what exactly did you save for?" The smile slid off her face. "Because I know it wasn't the down payment." Nobody moved. Vanessa blinked twice. Fast, the way you blink when the lights come on in a dark room and you're not ready. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass. "June, don't start." But I had already started. And this time, I wasn't going to stop. "June." My mother's voice dropped low and flat, the way she always sounded when she wanted to remind you that she was the adult and you were the problem. "This is Christmas dinner. This is not the time or place." "You're right, Mom. It wasn't the time when you asked me for $4,200 for a roof that wasn't leaking either, but here we are." Lorraine's face went white. Not the slow drain of embarrassment, but the instant flash of someone who's been caught mid-stride. She recovered fast. She always did. "I don't know what you're talking about. That money went to repairs. I called the contractor, Mom. He hasn't been to your house since April. You canceled the appointment." Uncle Don set his glass down. The base landed heavier than he intended. "What's going on?" Aunt Patty stopped chewing. Lily looked between me and my mother like she was watching a car skid on ice. Vanessa leaned forward, and her voice took on that slightly breathy, slightly incredulous tone, the one she'd inherited directly from our mother. "June, you're being so dramatic. This is exactly what you always do. You take something small and blow it up into..." "Dramatic?" I looked at her, calm, steady. The way you look at someone when you've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in the shower. Except I hadn't rehearsed it at all. The words were just there, clean and ready, because the truth doesn't need a script. I paid $4,200 that Mom told me was for roof repairs. That money ended up helping fund your down payment. And you knew, Vanessa. You knew, and you said nothing. The table was silent. Derek, who had been staring at his plate for the last minute, lifted his head. Slowly, his eyes moved from me to Vanessa, and stayed there. Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. In that moment, sitting at that table with 14 pairs of eyes shifting between me and my sister, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Vanessa didn't look smug anymore. She looked scared. And my mother, for the first time in my entire life, looked small. I used to wonder why I kept sending money, kept showing up, kept hoping for something as simple as thank you. Maybe you've wondered the same thing about someone in your life. Why do we keep watering plants that never bloom? If you've ever sat at a table like mine, tell me in the comments, what was your breaking point? My mother stood halfway out of her chair, palms pressed flat on the table, trying to wrestle the evening back under control. Let's not ruin Christmas over a misunderstanding. That's when Vanessa made her mistake. She turned to the table, chin lifted, voice bright and brittle, and said, "Look, whatever June thinks she knows, Derek and I are doing fine. Our house is ours. We're comfortable. Everything's on track." She reached for Derek's hand across the table. "Right, babe?" Derek didn't take her hand. He looked at her, then at me, then back at her. His mouth a thin line, his eyes doing calculations he hadn't known he needed to make. And then, from the middle of the table, Ruth Kendrick spoke. She'd had 2 glasses of eggnog by then. Her cheeks were pink, and her voice carried the cheerful carelessness of someone who has no idea she's about to detonate the room. "Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Vanessa. Honestly, I was a little concerned after that second missed payment notice came through the system. But if you say you're back on track, well, that's just wonderful." She said it the way she said everything. Warm, neighborly, certain that she was being helpful. The table went so quiet I could hear the candle flames breathing. Derek pulled his hand back from where it had been resting near Vanessa's. Slowly, like a man pulling his fingers away from the edge of something hot. "Second missed payment," he said. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of quiet that's louder than shouting. Vanessa's mouth opened. "Ruth, that's private." Ruth's pink cheeks turned scarlet. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh dear. I'm so sorry. I thought you two had already... I assumed." She hadn't meant to do it. She hadn't meant to do anything. But the truth has a way of finding the one crack in the wall and pouring through. And Ruth Kendrick, God bless her, had just kicked the wall down. Derek's fork was still in his right hand. He set it down. Not gently, not violently, just with the careful precision of a man who knew that if he wasn't careful with the small things, he'd lose control of the big ones. "Vanessa." His voice was a flat line. "How much do we owe?" Derek, not here. "How much?" Not a question anymore. A door closing. Vanessa pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet, and her new earrings, the ones she'd bought for tonight, the ones that caught the candlelight so beautifully an hour ago, now looked like the most expensive part of a costume that was falling apart. She didn't answer. My mother stepped in, because my mother always stepped in when Vanessa's narrative was threatened. "Derek, every young couple has some debt starting out. It's completely normal. Let's not make this into something it isn't." Derek turned to Lorraine. His expression didn't change, but his voice did. It got quieter, which, if you knew Derek, meant it got more dangerous. "Mrs. Bellamy, did you know about this? I helped where I could." "She helped with my money, Derek." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. $4,200. I was told it was for roof repairs on this house. It wasn't. Derek stared at me for a second. Then he looked at Vanessa. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd built a future with, the woman who apparently had built that future on a foundation of someone else's money and silence. He picked up his napkin, folded it once, placed it beside his plate. Then he pushed his chair back. The leg scraped against the wood floor, loud in the silence. Stood up, took his phone from his pocket, and walked to the front porch. Through the glass door, I watched him standing in the falling snow, phone pressed to his ear, face lit by the porch light. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pacing. That was worse. Vanessa was crying now. Not the delicate movie star kind. The real kind. The kind where your mascara runs and your breathing gets jagged and the table full of people who admired you 5 minutes ago doesn't know where to look. My mother was still standing, hands gripping the edge of the table, her expression cycling between fury and something older, fear. The fear of a woman watching a story she'd spent 13 years constructing start to collapse in real time. "This is what you wanted, isn't it, June?" Her voice shook. "To humiliate your family on Christmas?" "No, Mom. I just stopped pretending." "Your father—" She caught herself, then pushed through anyway, because the weapon was all she had left. "Your father would be ashamed of you." Before I could respond, a chair scraped at the other end of the table. Margot stood up. She wasn't tall, she wasn't loud. She was a 61-year-old woman in a navy cardigan with dirt still under one fingernail from the flower shop. But when Margot Bellamy stood, people listened, because she only stood when she meant it. "Lorraine." Her voice was clear and level, the voice of a woman who had kept quiet for years and chosen this exact moment to stop. "My brother would have been ashamed of how you've treated the daughter who is most like him." Lorraine opened her mouth. Margot wasn't finished. "I know June paid $31,000 to this family in 3 years. I know, because she showed me the records. And I know she just bought her own house, with cash, because I was standing beside her when she signed the closing papers." The room turned to me. All of it. Every face. Uncle Don's mouth was open. Aunt Patty had her hand pressed to her chest. Lily's eyes were wide. Even Ruth, who was still trying to recover from her own accidental bomb, stared. "You bought a house?" Uncle Don said. I nodded. My mother let out a short, sharp sound, half laugh, half disbelief, and shook her head. "A house? You?" Her voice climbed into the register she used when something threatened the order she'd built. "With what money? You don't even have a real—" She stopped herself one word too late, but everyone at the table heard the shape of the sentence. "You don't even have a real job." I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just the slow, deliberate act of a woman who was done receiving words from a seated position. I looked at my mother. Then at Vanessa, whose face was blotchy and wet. Then at the table. 14 people who had watched me shrink for years and never said a word. "You asked me when I was going to settle down." My voice was even. Quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people lean in instead of pull away. "I already did. I paid cash. $159,000. No mortgage. No debt. No one else's money." I turned to my mother. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." And the room stopped. I mean it. It stopped. Like someone pressed pause on the universe. 14 people, frozen mid-breath. A fork slid off someone's plate. Aunt Patty's, I think, and hit the porcelain with a bright, clean clink that echoed in the silence like a bell. 5 seconds. I counted. My mother's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Nothing. Vanessa looked down at the table, her hands flat on either side of her plate, her shoulders curved inward like the frame of a house that's lost its center beam. The Christmas music was still playing from the little Bluetooth speaker on the sideboard. Silver bells. The irony would have been funny if I hadn't been trembling from the inside out. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The candles flickered. And for 5 eternal seconds, the only sound in the Bellamy dining room was the truth, settling into every corner like the first real snow of winter. My mother found her voice first. It came out cracked, stripped of its usual polish, like a road after a hard freeze. "June, I did what I had to do for this family. No, Mom. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. You did what you had to do for Vanessa. I was the one doing for this family. And I'm done. Vanessa looked up. Her mascara had drawn 2 dark lines down her cheeks, and her voice came out thin, the voice of someone reaching for a rope she isn't sure is still there. June, I didn't mean for... You knew, Vanessa. I held her gaze, not with anger, with something heavier, the steady, exhausted clarity of a person who has finally run out of reasons to pretend. You took the money, you knew where it came from, and you posted, "Thanks to the best mom ever." You didn't even text me. She had no answer. She looked down at her plate, and for the first time in 30 years, my sister had nothing charming to say. I took a breath. When I spoke again, my voice was softer. Not soft like weakness. Soft like a decision that's already been made. I love you both. I do. But I'm not going to be the invisible bank account anymore. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with seeing me. Not my wallet, not my silence. Me. I reached behind my chair and picked up my coat from where I'd draped it over the backrest. Pulled it on. Zipped it. I looked at Margot. She was already standing, her purse tucked under her arm like she'd been ready for this moment since before she sat down. Merry Christmas, everyone. I walked to the front door. Margot followed. Behind us, 12 people sat at a table full of food. Nobody was eating anymore, and the only sound was silver bells, playing to no one. The door closed behind us. The cold air hit my face, and I kept walking. The snow was falling harder now. Big, soft flakes that caught the porch light and turned gold for half a second before landing on the railing and disappearing. Derek was still on the porch, phone against his ear, his breath making clouds. He looked at me as I came through the door. Our eyes met for a single second, not hostile, not warm, just the shared understanding of 2 people who'd both discovered tonight that the ground under them wasn't solid. I walked to my car. Margot walked to hers. We didn't speak until we were both inside our separate vehicles with the engines running and the heaters breathing warmth into the cold. My phone buzzed. Margot. A single text. You did good. Drive safe. I pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, my mother's house shrank. The string lights, the wreath, the glow of the dining room where 14 people were sitting in the ruins of a story that had just been rewritten. I drove 20 minutes to my house. My house. The key was still new enough that I had to jiggle it twice. The door opened into darkness, and I found the light switch by memory. The living room was mostly empty. Bare floors, white walls, a reading chair in the corner, a gift from Margot, delivered the week before. A floor lamp beside it. That was all. I didn't turn on music. I didn't check the group chat. I sat in the reading chair, still wearing my coat, and looked out the window at the snow coming down on a yard that belonged to me. My hands were shaking. I held them in my lap and waited for it to stop. I thought I would feel victorious. I didn't. I felt empty. The kind of empty that comes when you finally put down something you've carried so long you forgot it had weight. But somewhere beneath the emptiness, underneath the trembling and the cold and the echo of my mother's face, something new, small, quiet, like the first green thing that pushes through the ground after a long winter. Relief. The week between Christmas and New Year's is supposed to be quiet. Mine wasn't. Derek texted me on December 26th. 2 sentences. I checked the credit report last night. I didn't know about any of it. Thank you for being honest. I replied, I'm sorry you found out that way. He sent a thumbs up. That was enough. Between people who deal in facts, it usually is. From what I pieced together later, through Margot, through Aunt Patty, through the way small-town information travels whether you want it to or not, Derek had discovered $23,000 in credit card debt that Vanessa had been carrying in her name alone. The second missed mortgage payment was real. The glazed ham, 3-bedroom, yard for future kids' dream house was one more missed payment away from a very difficult conversation with the bank. Derek didn't file for divorce, but he did 3 things. He insisted they see a financial counselor, He took over management of their joint account, and Vanessa sold the leased SUV and started driving his old pickup while he rode with a coworker. You could see it parked in their driveway. A dented white Ford, where a shiny black SUV used to be. Uncle Don called my mother 2 days after Christmas. Aunt Patty was on the extension. They asked one question. "Lorraine, how much of what June said is true?" My mother tried her usual deflection. It was blown out of proportion. You know how June is. But Dawn cut her off. "We're not fools, Lorraine. We've known something was off for a long time." The strong, single mother who manages on her own. The character my mother had played for 13 years. Closed its run on December 24th. Ruth called me on the 28th. "June, honey, I am so sorry. I had no idea that would—" "You didn't do anything wrong, Ruth. The truth just needed some air." She paused. "You sound like your father." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "Thank you." 3 weeks later, mid-January, the snow was deep, the kind of deep where the plows come through at 4 a.m., and the scraping sound wakes you up and then puts you back to sleep. I was unpacking a box of kitchen things in my new house. A set of pots I'd bought secondhand, a wooden cutting board, a mug with a chip on the handle that I liked because it fit my thumb exactly. When my phone rang, "Mom." I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I picked up, because I'd promised myself I'd be honest, and ignoring her wasn't honest. It was just the other side of silence. "June." Her voice was softer than usual, but I recognized the architecture underneath. The careful scaffolding she built around her words when she needed something. "I've been thinking a lot since Christmas, and I want you to know, I'm sorry you felt hurt by everything. I'm sorry you felt hurt. Not, I'm sorry I hurt you. Not, I'm sorry I lied about the roof. Not, I'm sorry I spent 13 years treating you like a credit line with a heartbeat. I'm sorry you felt hurt. The apology that isn't one." I let it sit for a moment. Then she kept going. "Anyway, the heating bill for January came in higher than I expected. $620. And with the cold snap, I was wondering if maybe—" There it was. The ask. Tucked behind the apology like a bill slipped under a sympathy card. "Mom." My voice was gentle. Not because I was weak. Because I'd already fought this fight, and I'd won. "I love you. But I already told you. I can't be that person anymore. Call the energy company. They have a senior assistance program. I'll text you the number." Silence, long enough for me to hear the wind outside her window. "You've changed, June." "No, Mom." I looked around my kitchen, my pots, my chipped mug. I just stopped disappearing. I hung up, gently, placed the phone on the counter, and went back to unpacking. April came the way it always comes to small towns in the Northeast, slowly, then all at once. The snow thinned, the gutters ran, and one morning I walked out onto my porch with a cup of coffee and saw it. The crabapple tree in my front yard had bloomed. Pale pink buds, small and deliberate, opening along branches that had looked dead all winter. The house still wasn't finished. The living room had a sofa now. Navy blue, second-hand, with a tear on one cushion I'd patched with iron-on fabric from the craft store. My desk sat by the window where the morning light came through best. My father's photo hung above the reading chair, the one from the ice cream shop. Both of us squinting, both of us laughing. I still worked remote, still lived alone, still wasn't married. And for the first time in my life, none of that felt like a gap. It felt like a choice. Vanessa texted me in March. "Can we talk sometime?" I replied, "When you're ready to talk honestly, I'm here." She hadn't called yet. I wasn't waiting. My mother posted less on social media. The "I manage on my own" declarations had stopped. I didn't follow her page anymore, but Margot mentioned it once over tea. "She's quieter," Margot said. "I don't know if that's growth or just shock. Time will tell." Margot came over every Saturday. She brought flowers from the shop, whatever hadn't sold by closing time. The kitchen table usually had a jar of something blooming on it. We drank tea on the porch and talked about ordinary things: weather, recipes, the neighbor's dog that kept digging under my fence. One Saturday, she looked at the crabapple tree and said, "It's blooming earlier than I expected." "Some things just need room," I said. She smiled. We drank our tea. Here's what I know now, after all of it. I didn't burn any bridges. I just stopped crossing the ones that led nowhere. And I found out something no one ever tells you. When you stop being invisible to yourself, it doesn't really matter who else can't see you. The tree is blooming. The house is mine. The silence is kind. And that's enough. That's my story. Some of you might think I was too harsh. Some of you might think I should have said more. Either way, tonight I'm sleeping in a house I own, with no mortgage, no guilt, and nobody's expectations hanging on the walls. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, a boundary you've been afraid to set, a truth you've been swallowing to keep the peace, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and if you want to hear another story like this, there's one linked in the description that I think will stay with you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you for listening, truly.